Hey everybody, welcome back to Eggs. This week we have special guest Prady Tewarie. Prady is an entrepreneur and businessman based out in the Boston City area. He's current CEO of Azoff, a supplement company that specializes in nootropics. And he's currently on a mission to teach entrepreneurs about the opportunities that exist all around them and that it's okay to be a small businessman. Specifically, not every business needs to collect $1 billion in capital before they get started, and that they need to change the world. Instead, entrepreneurs can start small, and by turning their own neighborhoods around, and most importantly, they can still be considered an inspiration and a success in doing so. So, here to talk about business and life and all kinds of good things is our special guest, Prady Tewarie.
Hey, Prady, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks for making the time, and thank you for being flexible and willing to reschedule on us. I had some stuff come up yesterday, so thank you for pushing it back a day.
No worries. It's always a process. I think a lot of people don't know when you put a production up like this, like a podcast or video. There's at the same time you have so many things ongoing. You have video, you have audio, and there's so much technology involved. And I think a lot of people listening in, they just hear the final product, but all the technical stuff that goes into it's so much work. I've had the opportunity to see a lot of the production stuff and from the editing and all that stuff. It's a lot of work. So totally understandable.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think a lot of people don't realize all that. And you, Prady, do a podcast of your own, correct?
Yeah, I do. Yep, it's called The Enlightened Millennial, and it's a podcast that I started with a close friend of mine. But just starting that podcast, it started off something simple. We're having a conversation, grabbing a couple of drinks, and my buddy Leo was like, "Man, we should record this and make a podcast out of it." And at the beginning, you're like, "Yeah, that's going to be fun," but then the amount of work that it sometimes takes, and as people start like listening, and then you get actual people that are following you and asking questions and DMing you, then you feel all of a sudden you have the responsibility on your shoulders to make sure that it's a good podcast and that you're getting good quality content, that you're on top of it, and then you start to realize how much work goes into just something like that. We think sometimes that because the internet is accessible to everyone, because there's kind of like the barrier to entry is pretty low, but because the barrier of entry is low, so many people can participate. So the competition on there is actually pretty high because there's so many people participating. So I think then you start to recognize that if you really want to stand out, you have to do so many different things, just like you guys are doing on your show. You go on your website, you have stream, you have an audio, a live recording. So it's just all the things that you need to do to stand out. So it's definitely a lot of work.
Yeah, the behind the scenes are crazy that people don't even realize. I think we've been here for about an hour and a half prepping for today, just trying to get through technical issues that we're running into. Like right now, we switched computers for the video, and that's what we were dealing with for the most part. But yeah, it never ends. You always have different hiccups that come along, and you kind of have to just jump over the hurdles as they come.
Yeah. So I guess start to talk a little bit about you, Prady. Let's talk about your background and where you come from. It seems from the little bit of research I've done on you and everything, you've always been sort of a driven entrepreneur type character. But let's talk about where that comes from, how you got your start, and what a young early days Prady version looked like.
Yeah, man. I was always kind of I think it's the typical thing you hear a lot of people talk about that go on the entrepreneur route. I felt like the kind of the structured life was really never for me. I didn't really do well in school. I wasn't really doing super well at my grades. But one thing that I always had a knack for was trying to find different ways in which I can make income or just do something different. And one of the things that I started doing really early on, I started to sell things. So anything I could get my hands on, I would sell. And I remember one of my first projects was my grandparents are from India. I was born in the Netherlands, and then I moved here for college. But while I was in India, I know one time I was in the city, and Nike actually drops a lot of their shoes that they don't actually bring to market into this like warehouse in India that they never bring to market. And one of my buddies told me about it, and they're like, "Man, you got to see all these Nike shoes that they're just dumping them here." And I saw a great opportunity with that. And I went to the warehouse. I was pretty young at the time, and I started importing them, bringing them with me every trip, back here to Europe and then to the States. And I would sell them on eBay for a really good profit margin. And that was like, basically looking at opportunities that are all around us. But that was always my story. Like everyone knows me. I would try to find ways to be creative, ways to be entrepreneurial. That was just always something that I wanted to do. And this obviously is a big conversation that we hear people talk a lot about, like what, are you born an entrepreneur? Can you become one? What is the process like? And I think probably it's a mix of both. I think there's a lot of things that you can train yourself to be a better entrepreneur, a better businessman, learn, cash flow dynamics and the finance aspect of it. But I think the real core concepts around being okay with taking risk, and being okay with doing something different, they were just like instilled in me at a pretty young age. And I think this is just how I was like from a very young age, man.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I think that's a pretty common thread among entrepreneurs, that type of character set. But I think you hit on something kind of interesting because, we're all, especially nowadays, bombarded, especially, I guess, for folks who are trying to get into business or who are trying to become entrepreneurs. They're bombarded with the, Gary Vaynerchuk types and the, I mean, and there's 100 million of these guys right now, Absolutely. Not to single him out specifically, but I mean, there are a lot of people spewing a lot of great information, but I think sometimes it can become overwhelming, especially as a young person or as a, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on, millennials and young people right now to, be amazing entrepreneurs and look like Kylie Jenner and, like everybody's supposed to be rich. Like, what are we doing here? And so sometimes I feel like when you get that motivation, like, it is valuable, but at the same time, it's difficult to be able to tell apart what you need to actually take and run with versus what you don't. And so I wondered if maybe you had some advice for young budding entrepreneurs who are looking for information. I noticed, like, in particular, you have a lot of content that is sort of motivational, sort of real, sort of, keep it authentic kind of discussion, where people are, asking you little questions and you're just kind of giving them, the no nonsense version of how to do something. And I thought that was really beneficial because, like I say, there's so much fluff out there that I think it's good to get kind of a straight take on things sometimes. So you mentioned at the beginning that some people are curious, can they learn to become an entrepreneur? And I guess, like, you can learn any skill. Obviously, you can improve by studying and learning more. But I wonder if you have some practical advice for people who are trying to become entrepreneurs, who are maybe afraid to take that first step, and how to maybe sort through the plethora of either wanted or unwanted advice that's floating around out there.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do for anyone, if you want to go in a profession, like if you want to be a CEO, start a company, I think the best learning tool is not really, watching motivational videos, watching YouTube videos. I would shadow someone that's actually doing that and figuring out whether the lifestyle is actually something that you want to do. I think, we've had this for a long time. Every generation, it kind of changes. Back in the 80s and 90s, like, people want to be astronauts and pilots, and then doctors and engineers, and then it was lawyers. And I think now the hot thing is to become a CEO and an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of that stems from people feeling insecure about what's happening in the digital economy with the gig economies. People feel like we don't have the stability of jobs anymore, so we need to be masters of our own ship and figure, work for ourselves. And I totally understand that aspect, but I'm not. I think where I kind of differ, when people say, "Hey, I want to be I want to start a business too," and instead of saying, "Okay, yeah, you should definitely do it," I'm like, "Why?" Because I don't think it is something that actually everyone. It's not that they can't do it. I don't actually think everyone wants to do it, and that's a different. Just the semantics are slightly different with that, because I feel like when you realize that, you can, and I differ with Gary Vee a little bit on this. He's like, "Hey man, like, if you can work for yourself and make, a certain amount of income, say, 50, 60,000, versus if you work for someone else and you make the same money, it's better to work for yourself." I sometimes differ on that, because I think a lot of these motivational speakers, they tend to believe that their way is the only way. And like, if you don't do the entrepreneurial route, like, then you're not good, or you're bad, and make people feel bad about themselves. And I don't agree with it. I think working for a stable employer actually gives you a lot of access to, insurance and medical benefits, and you do have some sort of stability. So I don't think people should really consider and understand what they're getting themselves into. And that, to answer your question, the best way to do that is to actually seek out not people that you see on Instagram or all that stuff, like actual people that have started companies, people that have come in, for instance, on your show, that have an entrepreneurial background, that actually starting to have raised money or have employees, and actually shadow them and see truly what their life is really like, and then figure out whether you actually want to do those things. Because I've had this many times where, people come and intern with me for a summer or for like 4 or 5 months. And I think 95% of the time, every one of them has said, hey man, I really don't think this is for me. And they started off as being like the hardcore Gary V motivational, listeners, and they just don't want to do it. And I think that's good because it's, we have a limited amount of time in our life. So it's best to start, pursuing those things that we really want to do. And if you spend most of your life thinking, I want to do X, but if X isn't really for you, then you're going to pursue something that just kind of a waste of your time. And I feel like, another thing people have to realize, like a lot of these motivational speakers, like they make an income from making you feel good. Like that's, if they say something and it makes you feel bad or poor or not so good, you don't want to listen to that person again. So, people listening to me, if I say, hey man, I don't think entrepreneurship is really for you, they might get disappointed. Like, I don't want to listen to Prady anymore. Right. But I don't sell a course. I don't sell any of that stuff. So it doesn't really matter for me, as much, but for other people that are selling books, that are selling courses, that are selling seminars, they want you to make it seem like it's so easy to start, flipping houses everywhere and making millions of dollars from this income and that. And because they want you to feel good, so you buy their product. So there is some sort of incentives tied to it. But long story short, you should actually go and work with entrepreneurs in the field and see whether the life that they have is really for you, because it's gonna, I can speak about this, but how, just what entrepreneurship forced me to do and kind of the life that it led me to live. But, definitely touch on that. But I think that's the key takeaway, because you're not going to get that from Instagram or listening to motivational gurus,
Yeah, no, actually, I think that's a pretty awesome point to make, actually. And it's not one I've heard before, out there is this idea that maybe, you're listening to Gary Vee or whatever, but maybe you're not an entrepreneur. Maybe you shouldn't be. And so I think that idea of discovering it early on is wise. Most people don't have, or, assume they need to be a certain way because of whatever they see on Instagram or in the media or whatever.
Right.
And they don't actually consider the alternative, which is maybe that's not what I want to do anyway.
Well, and then also the stability of the 9 to 5 and having the insurance and benefits. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people will get into the entrepreneurial stuff and forget that, that's an option, that retirement and benefits and medical and all that stuff is actually, it might be a better approach to go down that route, get some income coming in, and then work on your hustle on the side. And that way you might have the finances to actually get what you need done, so.
Yeah, no, I think that is that's all really important information. It makes me think, because one of the things that drives me nuts about the Gary V's of the world, and I'm not like an old guy by any means, but I'm 39. And what I found with a lot of his content, and not just his, but lots of others, is that most of it seems to be geared towards the 20 somethings that are just getting out of college or whatever. And so it seems like, he's creating a version of life that means, when you get out of college, you're supposed to go down this path. And I think, like you're saying, a lot of people discover that's not actually the path for me, but feel guilt about it, or like they're somehow doing the wrong thing by not pursuing an entrepreneurial career.
Yeah.
So I think that's really insightful.
So at 28, you had founded and sold more than 24 businesses. Can you talk about, let's talk about the first one. And then did anything change as you went along? Did it become easier, or was it something that each one has its own kind of hurdles and hiccups, and you just kind of have to take each one at a time?
Yeah, it's quite a process, but I think when people talk about entrepreneurship, and especially because I'm in Boston, this is a big tech town after Silicon Valley. People think entrepreneur, you have to have an app, you have to have a software, or you have to have it's all tech. If you're not tech, then you're not an entrepreneur. For me, this is part of the intro that you gave, but there's a lot of opportunity that people aren't looking at, that are businesses too, and you can use the same fundamentals and actually succeed. So for me, I got a nag out of this, because again, this was something that I really enjoyed doing, but this was just an opportunity just to stumbled upon me. These were, and it's kind of funny because people think this is super boring, but and this is a great story, but it were tanning salons, barbershops, hairdressers. So one of the first one was actually a friend of mine, and she asked me to help her mom out because she had a tanning salon and she couldn't get, basically customers come through the door. And she knew that I had some background in marketing, and I was trying to do some email and copywriting. So I went into tennis line, and I don't know anything about this business, nothing. And, I asked her mom, I was like, what are you doing right now for marketing? She was like, not really much. And then I asked her, are you using, email marketing? Do you have people's email addresses? And she said, well, I have their addresses, but I never send them an email. I was like, why not? She said, well, I just don't. I've never sent anyone an email. And I knew at that point, like, that she was sitting on a gold mine, because at that stage, email marketing was really exploding. So I was like, yeah, I want to, be in your business. I want to help out. And I just made her, kind of a drastic attempt to, help her out. And she said, sure. So we started sending out emails to people, very simple, sending out newsletters to people on emails with loyalty and coupon rewards. And yeah, the traffic just came into the door like nothing else. And then at that point, I asked her to basically seller finance me her business, and she was super excited about it. So we did that. And then I think after 8 or 9 months, we flipped that business around and we sold it. But then I started repeating that business model, but mostly in small businesses. I did various small cafes and restaurants and kept doing that up until I started getting to the supplement business, which is kind of my passion right now. And basically what I do is identify small businesses that are in the space that are, they're off the ground running already and they have a customer base, but they're just kind of stuck. And these are businesses that are usually still in the 6-figure range, right shy of, 7-figure range. And they're just stuck. They're not really making momentous change because every business goes through a life cycle. In the beginning, you start a business, you get customers, and then the same customers kind of come back, but you can't reach that next level. And that's really where I like to come in and figure out ways to actually, turn that business around. And so I was, while most of my peers in Boston, and I went to Boston University, a lot of entrepreneurship happening. Everyone's kind of busy, trying to build the next Facebook or Uber or, any of the social media platforms. For me, it was mostly about finding small businesses in the area, in the neighborhood that needed help. And I kind of built my career off that. And you have to do a lot of volume, obviously, for it to be, starting to be quite lucrative. But that was kind of the process that I overwent, and I still go through right now.
Okay. Well, that was one, actually dovetails nicely into one of the first questions I want to really get into with you is, where do you think first-time business owners go wrong and most frequently get stuck? So I know that these guys, like you're saying, they kind of hit a sticking point, and then they require some kind of left turn, I guess, to sort of get over the hump. And I think this is really common in small business. And I mean, even things that aren't business centric, even just in your personal life, sometimes it requires change to really, take that left turn and move forward, even if it's learning a new skill or whatever it is. Do you have any insight or advice you can share on that?
Yeah. So the most, and I'll give an insight and advice, based on age demographics, but with a lot of younger people, I feel like, especially now, where they get stuck a lot, they don't understand business. And they have no interest in that. So what they're more concerned about, and we get this quite a lot here. So people will show me their follower count or their social media statistics, but their profits just aren't there. And I think that what happens is they get very overly concerned with vanity metrics, and they don't understand fundamentals of business. So I do think that while you are an entrepreneur, you have risk taking, you are bold and aggressive. That's fantastic, but you're still running a business. And I think the biggest thing I've actually seen super easy is just organization. They're not organized. Like, you'll go into small business and they don't have their books straight half the time. Their entire online database is a complete mess. You can't find one from the other. There's no email system. There's no CRM system. There's nothing that's a structured business. And this is crazy, because when we acquire and sell businesses, if I'm a buyer, a company, private equity firm, whatever, that wants to buy a business, I would rather buy a less profitable business that has everything organized, all their books are set, all their systems are working and efficient, than a more profitable business where everything's a mess. And you will be surprised, man, how many times you'll see just businesses that are even, 7 figures, they're doing well, but after some time, dude, like, something's going to happen and this whole thing is going to collapse because they have no organization. So I think 85 to 90% of the time, you just have to come in and say, okay, guys, we need to really organize. There's even the emails, people are, and you'd be surprised, people do big businesses, what I would consider big, over 7 figures. They'll use personal credit cards. They'll mix their private emails and company emails, and there's a whole mess. So if you want to try to, you need to really set up a system. And that's the first thing that I try to do when I come into these businesses, how I can set up a system. Because what what people and companies want to acquire. And my goal always is, when you scale a business, you want to sell it. And so the way to sell it is that you have to have a business that's systematized, so that, if you take it over from me, you can just step in, you know where everything is, all the instructions are there, you can basically continue the next day. And if you can do that, my business is worth nothing, because no one else can take it over. That's a huge thing now. And I see that more than ever, where there's just no organization. So you need to learn to organize. And I think it's this mindset, well, I'm small anyways, I'm just starting a side hustle, I can just kind of mess around with it. But because you think that your business is never going to propel, then you keep everything disorganized, and then you don't prime it for growth. So systemization and organization.
So if you're that small business that you're starting off, you're unorganized, you don't have all your books in order, you don't have this or that, what's the first thing that you would focus on if you were coming into that business and you were going to kind of do an overhaul on them? Is it just accounting or an overall process in general, or is there one thing that you focus on specifically and go from there?
Yeah, the first thing always is accounting. It needs to be totally organized. Where's the revenue coming from? And you will notice that when people don't focus on their books, they lose tremendous amounts of money. And for a small business, like, it can be at a point where it can really dent their business, because like, hey man, we're making all these sales, but where are all profits? And it can be like $5, $6, $7 per order that they're getting in that can be saved. So yes, accounting is the key thing. But if people ask me, like, and this goes back to my business philosophy, like, what's my favorite business? As from a business model perspective, I always like the McDonald's model, because McDonald's, they figured out a system where they can, on a small, like, note card, you can write instructions on how to prepare that meal, and everything can be written on there, and anyone can be trained in less than 12 minutes. And that's what business should be systemized. So my goal is, like, what is the core competency of this business? And can it be systematized? Like, can you train anyone to really do what this business does? Because otherwise, you're more of a freelancer and you're not an entrepreneur. And there's a difference between the two, and the lines get blurred all the time. If you're, let's say, and this has nothing to do about being lucrative or not, because they're lucrative in both ways. But let's say, for instance, I'm a physician, or I'm a surgeon, and I have my own clinic or whatever. That you're not an entrepreneur, because you have to have a high level of study and education to really do what you do. So your business is dependent on you, the person, right? Or Gary Vee, for example. Like, Gary Vee is a personality. He himself is not like, he can't sell his brand to really anyone, because the brand is only valuable if Gary Vee is part of it. If Gary Vee is not part of it, the brand is not that valuable anymore. So my goal is, like, okay, this company and the systems of this company, the core competency, needs to be valuable without the current owners being part of it. And that means that I need to be able to put everything on right now I use a Google Doc, and just write down every system, like step 1, step 2. This is where the accounting is. This is where marketing material is. This is where emails is. And it sounds like super easy, because people say, oh man, you're a success. Like, what's that secret? Like, what did you do? What, like, software did you use? And it's like, dude, I just simple stuff like Google Docs and email and just MailChimp, just organizing everything. But the first thing, it starts with books,
Yeah, that actually, thinking of our process with eggs, going through and we've got Google Sheets, all our access credentials, we are kind of down to the T with this show. So I think it's kind of,
well, interesting too that you bring all that up, because I just read a book called Built to Sell.
Yep.
By a guy, I think his name's like John Warrillow or something like that. And but basically the whole premise is exactly what you've described. And for me, like, so in my real life, outside of the podcast, I run a marketing and advertising agency. And that's been one of the hardest things to do, is processize things, because basically we're in the business of giving custom solutions to every customer that comes through the door. However, this book, Built to Sell, basically showed you, it uses the example of a fictitious advertising agency to pull things in order and show you how you can process something even that doesn't feel like you could do it.
Yeah. So
I thought it was, a really valuable book for me, but it's cool to hear you hitting on that exact same topic.
So, for example, you in Ryan's situation, you've got the design firm, you've got your company built up. You're not necessarily building it up to sell it, though. You're in it for the long haul with that company, right?
Yeah, more or less. But I mean, but still, I think the idea is, in order to sell, you need process, and just if you did decide to sell down the road, that process that was developed in the scaling, would allow for sale.
Sure.
So I think, does that sound right? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, and honestly, man, it's not really that you have to sell it, but it comes down to success, right? So success is like, it needs to be a habit, and it's something that it's not reliant. I think a lot of people make good work and being productive based on emotions, so their mood. So if it's rainy outside, they don't want to go to the gym. If it's sunny outside, they'll go to the gym. If they're happy, then they'll do extra work. If they're not happy, they won't show up to work. The problem with that is it's very unpredictable, like how much you're going to able to produce. And the business, and most people build their businesses when it's disorganized on emotional factors. And I'll explain what that is. Like, some people don't come to work,
Sure.
or sometimes stuff gets done. If I don't feel like, working hard today, I have a headache, then I'm not going to do all this email stuff. And the truth is that motivation is going to let you down. Like, motivation is there sometimes when you need it, and will give you the best highs, but at any point in a given moment, it's going to let you down. It's going to kick you out, kick you to the curb. And what is left in life is discipline and systems. Systems are what build empires. Motivation can build a hobby, can get you through, some good days of training and workouts, or some good days but it's not going to be a real profitable business. A profitable business isn't relying on people's emotions or people's how they're feeling. It's built on systems. And, people are like, well, how can I do that? Like, how can I systematize my productivity? And I said, well, you do it all. People do it all the time. Like, people shower. Like, I shower twice, or sometimes 3 times a day. I brush my teeth twice a day. It doesn't matter if I'm angry, if I'm sad, if it's raining, if someone said something to me, if I'm upset, I'm still gonna shower. I'm still gonna brush my teeth. Why? Because it's a standard, it's a system, and it's my internalized discipline. So when we create systems in our own life, then those things will just happen all the time. Like, businesses that are systematized, it doesn't matter what happens to people and employees, if they're good or not. They keep performing, because there's a system in place where you're not relying on human emotion all the time. And I think that's the way, taking concepts, like you said, from that book, or taking concepts like Ray Dalio speaks in principles. But that's really how I distill it down, because it sounds like an abstract concept. But if you look at our own lives, there's things that we do no matter what every single day that are not necessary for our survival, but we still do them no matter what our feelings are, because they're systems. So if we can do that in our business, we can actually increase and boost profitability, because we'll do them. Sometimes it's not about doing everything the greatest in the world, but just getting it done. And when there's a system in your business, it will get done. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, no, it's really good advice, actually. And it sort of, takes me down this next path I wanted to explore with you. So one of the things in your past that we read is that you were a competition bodybuilder, fitness guy. Obviously this is a big aspect of your life. So it's, interesting or good timing that we were speaking about internal systems, or systems in our daily lives. And obviously, I mean, if you're going to be a competition bodybuilder, you're working out every day, probably more than once a day, things like that. And that became your routine or your schedule, so your system.
Well, it comes down to habits, right? It's like, I assume in bodybuilding, you probably worked out multiple times a day. You probably had a noon, and then after work kind of routine going on. Is that pretty much what it comes down to, is just developing good habits?
Yeah, man. And that's a fantastic lead in, because bodybuilding plays a big role in it. Especially as you start getting into, there's obviously bodybuilding, in the off season where you train and you eat well. And then when you get in the competitive level, the goal is really to create the most symmetrical, but also to create the most conditioned physique. So you really want to get down to super low body fat. I mean, you get to a point where you have trouble walking because the diet, the fat under your soul. So you're walking on your toes. Like, it gets really grueling. So it's an extreme sport. Oftentimes misunderstood, but it's a very extreme sport. But there are going to be points when bodybuilding teaches you where you do things because you have to do them, and then you don't have to always do things that you like. And so sometimes, in most of the diet, for like 20, 24 weeks when I diet, I mean, every meal is almost, especially at the end, it's just fish and asparagus, like every meal. And then you're super hungry. The food's really sucks. Like, it really does. It's not fun. It's like extremely excruciating. but for some way you just do it anyways, because what you're doing it for is bigger than your current emotion. Because we, at the end of the day, we do a cost benefit analysis, right? Every time we have to make a decision, we say, okay, what's the pain we're going to, go through, and what's the outcome? And if the outcome is greater for us subjectively than the pain we have to go through, we'll do it. And bodybuilding teaches you is like, the pain is going to be excruciating. What you're going to get is, a little trophy, and not a lot of people follow bodybuilding, so there's no fame or anything. But you do it anyway, because for me, it was like, I want to build and develop my character. And that became an obsession for me. But I learned that in order to succeed, I have to do things that I oftentimes will not like, and it's okay. You do it anyways. And it totally comes down to systems, and just massive preparation. So for instance, when I'm dieting, in my fridge, there's no other foods besides the food that I have to eat, all in Tupperware. All your food is cooked, a day or 2 or 3 days before, for the whole, almost like for half the week or the whole week. So basically, you just get in the fridge, you grab it, you eat it, and then you go to the gym, and basically it just becomes a system. Because a lot of people oftentimes ask, well, do you enjoy it? No, I mean, not always. It's not always fun. But if we make our lives about just doing things all the times that are fun, I mean, that's sometimes not the right approach. Because if we find what on the other side of that sacrifice, or whatever you want to call it, if that's something that you're aspiring to be, then all the small things that you have to do are just part of the process. And I think that bodybuilding has just been a great, it's probably the greatest thing that I did for myself and for my self-development. I started at a young age, in my teenage years, and it's 100%, I give it credit for just everything that I have, and my way of thinking and discipline that I've built in business right now, which is, and why I believe so strongly in systems and being able to, turn not so very profitable companies into more profitable businesses. And it just comes down to that thing, man.
Right. Well, and so you mentioned, and one of the points I was trying to make was that, you, by way of doing the weightlifting and doing the competition bodybuilding, people seem to have this understanding or this belief, and maybe it's just sort of social media that causes this, but we have sort of this feeling that stuff happens overnight. And I got a chance to review your Instagram before talking to you. And one of the posts on there that I thought was particularly important, or was a good message to share, was this idea that stuff takes time. And I think one of the people you were interviewing, or somebody that was in the shot with you, said something to the effect of, I'm a 20-year overnight success, or something like that, where basically, people look at maybe physique when you're on stage as a bodybuilder, but they don't think about the fact that you've been doing it for 15 years. And same with business. Most of these businesses, I know, like when I read Built to Sell, for example, I felt like crap. I was like, oh man, I totally blew it. I haven't been doing these systems. I haven't been doing these things. I haven't been doing all I'm supposed to be doing. But then I start to go, well, wait a minute though. I have done a lot of things, and I'm getting there. And, maybe in the next couple of years we'll be there, And so, but the premise is that it doesn't probably happen overnight for most people. Most people don't start out, knowing the solution or having the process completely solved. For most folks, they develop this as they go. And after putting in time served, 15, 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, whatever it takes, you may come out the other side successful. So I wondered if maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I thought that was an interesting perspective you shared.
I hate to keep at every time you say something and before he can reply, but I think systems are kind of like a process that evolves. So as you grow, your system's going to grow as well, and change and develop based on the needs of the business. So I think, you might not have thought that you were doing it the way it needs to be now, but your business has changed. So your system's going to change as well. But right.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's always evolving, and I think going back to your point, I think sometimes people, and that's why I started the show like this. I was asking you guys about all the effort that you guys put in the show, because it doesn't, for me, I'm going on your site and I'm like, man, you guys put in a lot of work to get this all going, and it's evident to me. But I think there's a lot of things at play here, especially social media, especially the internet, because we see just obviously these Instagram posts where people like, you see someone with a computer and a beach, and they have all these nice things, and they're like, man, I'm a trader, I make $100,000 a month, which I just started a year ago or something like that, and I think it gives a lot of people the wrong understanding, because it does take time. And even if a lot of people you know, people sometimes like, oh man, you're 28 and you've, you know, sold and all these businesses. But I started at like I had my first business, you know, my teen, like 14, 15. So it's been a while in the making, and it's still not, you know, it's still something that I have to keep working on. So it does take a lot of time. And this really comes down to also why people are doing what they're doing. And I think that's really important. It's an interview question I always ask to potential employees, to really understand why, like what their why is, and not in a cliched way, their why, because why would you want to, whatever you're doing, there has to be why you're doing it. And I try to understand whether that why is built on a strong foundation that's going to last versus an external foundation, which you can't see because it looks good on the outside, but it's actually going to tear down at any given point in time. So this comes down to, like I said before, a lot of times I meet people who want to start a business or want to go into bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is a great example for this. It's like, man, I want to do competition. I'm like, oh, why? He's like, well, and you know, I talked to them for a bit, and I realized, you know, they broke up with their girlfriend and they're angry. Like, I want to change my life around. I want to have a great physique and body now to show her, you know, and stuff like that. And the problem with that is you have to recognize whether the why you're doing it is so strong that it's gonna let you do all the stuff that you have to do to get to that to get to that journey, to get through that journey. And I think a lot of people, the fuel that they have, that motivation fuel, whether it's anger, a lot of times revenge, it's not enough. And so I'm a big proponent. So when I'm hiring people, I try to figure out, especially a lot of them are like, hey man, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to learn from you. And then I understand their motivations, and I, you know, make a determined judgment. I'm like, man, like what is motivating this person isn't something that's a long lasting fuel. It's just something that's going to give them a little hit and then it will kind of dissipate. So it does. And the real message and takeaway, it will take a long time. It does take a long time, but that's the joy of it. You know, I think a lot of us try to, you know, and you know, get quicker away from the journey, get to the end level so that we can, you know, feel great and feel joy and feel happiness. But what we realize is when you're doing something and you get to the end, you realize that the joy was in the journey. The joy was the journey itself. And I have that now too. It's like sometimes I go through a process, I finish competing, and then I'm like, man, like, wow, that's it. Like, I want to do another show now because I have nothing, like, I want to do something else. Or, you know, you start a business or you get involved in a business and you sell it. But then I realized the most fun part that I had was working in that business, was spending the late nights, was spending all those hours. That was what I enjoyed. And when you have that mindset, it's very hard to beat that person, because now you're not like, my motivation is like, oh, I'm gonna start this business so I can buy that Rolex. My motivation is I like business. Like, I like getting the ground running, organizing stuff, systemizing stuff. And so, you know, it's not very difficult for me. Like, I don't see it as a sacrifice when, you know, you're working until 3, 4, 5 in the morning. People are like, man, that must be really hard. You're making a lot of sacrifices. But that's bullshit. It's not hard, because I this is what I love to do, you know? So I think you have to, it's going to take a long time, and you need to recognize it. And you also, you know, you need to understand what your motivation really is. And it's something that, you know, I can talk about a little bit too, but I feel like a lot of motivation sometimes can be incorrect, and they end up really, you know, deceiving you and letting you hang and dry. So,
well, yeah. I wonder then, to that point, do you have any advice or any inclination, something you might steer, you know, a list to? You know, I think a lot of people don't know what they want because they're up and pulling it from social media or whatever. They're not even looking internally to find out what it is that they want. Because I fully agree with you. I mean, you know, I really enjoy the work I do. I really enjoy the process of building our business and all that. And so for me, you know, I don't feel like I go to work when I get up in the morning. It's awesome. And so for me, it's this great experience, which, you know, and ultimately I've got some long-term goals and things, but I mean, like, we'll get there when we get there because we're having a good time. But I think for a lot of people, they see, you know, they're too caught up. Like, you use the example of the Rolex, you know, you're too caught up seeing people, you know, rocking the Mercedes or whatever it is. And then you start going, well, God, I'm not good enough if I have that, or I'm not this or that if I haven't achieved this or that. Do you have any advice or insight into, I guess, how you actually hear your inner voice and have an understanding of what it is that you actually want?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's sometimes you have to spend time on yourself. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think one of the reasons why a lot of us don't know what we really want is because we just never spend time like by ourselves, like ever thinking what we really want. And I recommend people to do it because, you know, we're in, you know, school, and then we spend time, you know, teachers telling us, you know, what to do, or and, your parents, and then we always around friends. And I think people need to sometimes just spend time, like, I don't know, for a week or two, like figure out like, hey, what is it that I really like? And what is it that I should do? And I think some of us are fortunate enough, like I had this, for instance, on bodybuilding. I remember the first time I went on stage, and I didn't know what I was doing because I was like, 16 years old. But I remember I got on stage and there was this feeling I got, and I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do in my life. And you get a feeling, and it's just something that becomes a maddening obsession and a passion, because the rewards part of it, you don't really enjoy that, because for instance, I got into bodybuilding when I was 16, 17. I turned, my goal was to turn professional. I didn't turn professional until 2017. So it took me a long time, almost 10 years to get there. And I remember I was on stage and they were like, okay, and the winner is, and then it was me, and I gave a speech, and that was it. And so all those years, for 10 years, I basically trained like a madman, for 10 years straight. Never missed any workouts, never missed any meals. My only thing was, basically bodybuilding was a big, like pretty much the biggest part of my life, in addition to entrepreneurship and business. But the part where they announced me winner, and the part where I gave the little speech, thank you, in the auditorium, I think I counted it was like 3 minutes and 22 seconds. So 10 years versus 3 minutes and 22 seconds. So imagine if my only motivation was the 3 minutes and 22 seconds, I would never have been able to last for 10 years, because there's such a big imbalance between the two. So that's why I always recommend people is, if you want to do something that's very difficult, a lot of things are very difficult, but entrepreneurship and creating just a business that's just sustainable, that you can just hire people. Because right now we have this concept, like everyone's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, millions of dollars a month, but just having a business that you can hire people, you can pay your bills, and you're profitable, I think that's a huge compliment, because that's very few businesses in America are able to do that in the first 2, 3, 4 years. So just doing that, it's so difficult, and the competition is so deep, it's going to take so much work, that if you're just doing it for that little reward that you get somewhere down the line, the imbalance is going to be so big, and I think you're going to burn out. So you have to really spend a lot of time listening to and figuring out what is it that you truly want. And people need to get out of this mindset that the only way they can get financial freedom, or all the things that guys like Gary Vee or Grant Cardone talk about, is only through starting your own business. There's so many different ways that you can be a great musician, you can be a great athlete, you can work in a great company, and you can be so many things where you can do that. So once you get that out of the head, because I think people have made entrepreneurship, starting your own business, synonymous with the only way to create financial independence, which is not true. There's other ways to do that. And once you recognize that, then you can go back to the drawing board and really figure out where you have a natural propensity to doing things that you've always been great at. And if those things that you're great at are actually things that you like, and you focus all your attention on it, it's game over. You're going to succeed.
Yeah. So before we kind of switch topics here, I wanted to bring up one thing. You've been talking about why, and for the last few weeks, I've been working on a vision statement for my business. And one of the videos that I've been watching is TED Talk by Simon Sinek, How Great Leaders Inspire Actions. And he goes into breaking down the why of businesses, why, most businesses don't know why they actually are doing what they're doing. They're looking for more like the how and when and that kind of thing. They don't really know the why. So I'd highly recommend you guys go and watch that talk by Simon Sinek. And it's good content. Prady, you actually own a company that's a neurotropics company. It's a supplement kind of thing for what is it? Cognitive? Is that what Yeah, I think that's it. But can you break that down a little bit? What neurotropics is, and what your company's called Azoth? How long has it been around, and how'd you get that going?
Yeah, so this is basically so I went to law school, and I remember at some point I was competing for bodybuilding. I was trying to compete at the national level, and I was going going to law school. And my first year, I remember like first week of classes, I was like, dude, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. And then I also had my business on the side, and I was like, I don't know how I can do all three things. And I think the advice I got is, well, you have to choose. But I didn't like that. And I was like, well, right. I want to do all of them. And I don't just want to do them. I want to do them well, because that's just how I feel the best, when I'm able to do everything I can do, put my best efforts. So I started looking at ways. I was always really into peak productivity and figuring out how I can be more productive. So I was using like caffeine and some of the pre-workouts in bodybuilding. Instead of using it before a workout, I would actually use it before, like to start my day or before an exam or something. But I just felt they just weren't doing it for me because they would cause me to crash. So it was like, basically it was like besides the point, because you take something, you feel great for 30, 40 minutes, and then you kind of don't feel so good. And I realized, like, even though I'm a bodybuilder and I love the space, but most of the supplements in sports nutrition, it's called sports nutrition because they're just tested on athletes, and they assume that the only people that want to perform are athletes. But there's other people in society that want to perform well, entrepreneurs, working parents, whatever, all these types of people. And there's no supplements like really for that there's no category for them for peak performance. So basically what I looked at is I was looking at ways to what's called biohacking, like figuring out ways in which you can increase your body's performance. And I stumbled upon a class of ingredients. They're called nootropics. Long story short, it's pretty fascinating. And actually, the Russians used to use them in the 80s during the space race to give to their astronauts to basically it was a way to basically enhance their cognitive function. And they tried to beat the Americans, and they would give it to their astronauts to really start, being able to really outperform them from a cognitive standpoint. So I read about this somewhere, and I was like, man, I need to get my hands on these nootropics, like what it's all about. So I did, and I was getting basically these, and they were all at the time, they were all, being freely available. So I'd get them and I would start trying them, like, one by one, different combinations. At that point, you had to get them from like different suppliers. And I had a buddy, because I was still at BU at the time, and a buddy who basically worked at the chemistry lab, and we'd put it into a capsule, and I would take it for myself. Don't recommend people doing that without doing your research. But I was doing it, and yeah, man, after a while, dude, I was like, this was fantastic. And the way the nootropics work, long story short, is that instead of like bringing your dopamine levels and shooting them up, which then will go down, it just brings them back to balance. So most of us have our dopamine levels basically shot up or down because of frequent use of caffeine. So after 10, 20 years of caffeine use, all of it is like up or down, and nootropics come in and they just bring them back to balance. So imagine like feeling like you're totally in the zone or having the best night's sleep like all the time. So so I experimented with it, and I started using them. And a couple of my friends were asking, hey man, what are you using? I want to try using it. And yeah, man, this was not a business that I ever planned for, ever had a strategy, no systems, nothing. People asking, man, I want to buy this stuff too. And so I was like, okay, well, I need to need to make a real thing, from this. I need to go to a manufacturer. I had to basically source materials. Long story short, create a company called Azith. And we sell one product. It's a nootropic product. It had to be reformulated a couple of times just to make sure that it fits the FDA guidelines. And yeah, the goal with that product is a productivity product, and people use it. There's no caffeine in the product, but people use it as a way to boost their productivity. So it's very subtle. You don't really feel any jolt or anything, but it's a subtle thing. It's like when you're doing work, you'll be able to do it for like 2, 3, 4 hours, and you won't even realize that the time has really gone and you've been so concentrated. So that's kind of the process and what nootropics really are, man.
That's cool. Well, hey man, we're getting kind of along in this thing. We're at about an hour already, so which I can't believe because it's flying right by. I wanted to ask you just one last question, if you got an extra minute, just about the value of networking and building a network around you. The way that the old phrase or the old throwaway phrase is your network is your net worth, or you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or whatever. There are a lot of these kinds of sayings. I wondered if you could talk just quickly about, the importance of building a network, finding good people to surround yourself with, and, how that's been beneficial in your career.
Yeah, it's everything. We can work as hard as we can. I remember at some point I was doing over 100 plus hours, and I couldn't get further. Like there was just a stop. And I was like hitting a roadblock. I was like, man, what am I doing wrong? Because I realized, and people have to realize, that you can get a certain way by working really hard, like grueling, crazy work ethic will get you really far. But at some point, there's only one of you, and there's only 24 hours a day. So what networking and finding the right people that are in your circle, that are motivating you, that are in there with you to get you, get you to the next level, they'll be able to unleash your growth to the next level. And I think that's what people honestly don't a lot of times realize, because they think that, I can do a lot of things, and they can, but you'll hit a ceiling. And I think surrounding yourself with people that are doing great things is going to propel you from, being great to being excellent. And I've talked about this on some of my podcasts and stuff before, but if you look at some of the top successful people, what they've been able to do, whether it's athletes or top entrepreneurs, they've been able to tap into their network of people that are doing great things, that are providing them resources, and then they can take their skill level to the next level, whether it's give them access to library or resources or engineering things, or give them access to great scouts or coaches. And I think that's the difference a lot of times between raw talent and talent that will get you to playing, in high school or maybe even D1. But if you want to get to the pro level, you need people that are going to be there to support you. So I have a concept which has been out there for a bit, but I like to eat. I eat one meal a day with someone else that I'm networking with. I never eat by myself. I try not to, but at least once a day, I will eat with someone else that I'm networking. So just because what's the point in me, sitting in my office or in my apartment, like eating alone, because I'm not learning anything. So I try to find, whether it can be anyone. It can be, friends, alumni, someone that you've not caught up with. I always eat with someone else, like lunch, like religiously, like 7 days a week. And that's been a big, whenever I stumble on a problem, I'm not getting ahead. I'm like, okay, I got to meet more people. Like my business is not moving forward. I got to meet more people. Like we're stuck with profits. I got to meet more people. And that's been my answer a lot of times, because a conversation or someone's opinions or someone's connecting me to someone else has always been the catalyst for massive growth.
Yeah. I was actually listening to Jordan Harbinger the other day. I don't know if you ever listened to him or not, but one thing that he does is he goes back in his messages and goes all the way to the very last one. And he does this like every day at like 10, and he re-engages 5 people that he hasn't talked to in the last 3 or 4 months, just to start a conversation again and get it going, so that he keeps that network kind of fresh, and the people that he's networked with don't just fall off the vine. So
Right.
Yeah,
That's
that
good,
sounds
yeah.
like good advice.
Yeah.
Well, and that's really cool. I like that idea of never eating alone either. That's a pretty clever idea. So cool. Well, we'll let you out of here, Prady. We've gone on a little bit long, so we really appreciate you taking the extra time. Where can people find out more about Azeth, more about you personally, and everything else you're up to?
Yeah, the best way is through Instagram. You type in my name, Prady Tewarie, Prady Tewarie, on Instagram. I'm usually on there. People can send me a DM, and my email, all the contact information is on there. And I always respond to everyone. So I spend quite a bit of time going through all my DMs, and I usually respond to everyone that I can. And so I'm more than happy to field any questions. And I mean, the purpose of this is not really to talk about myself, but to provide value. So that's my mission whenever I give an interview. So hopefully I was able to do that. And if people have any questions, please do reach out to me. More than happy to answer anything.
Excellent. Cool. And so you can learn more about the supplement, the nootropic, over at getazoth.com, which is getazoth.com. You can also hear the podcast, The Enlightened Millennial. I guess it's on iTunes and every place podcasts are found. And yeah, any parting shots, Prady? Anything else you'd like to say before we get out of here?
No, man, had a fantastic time. Hopefully people have more of an appreciation for what you guys do and all the effort that you guys are putting for the show. And hopefully people go back and look and do a personal inventory of their own lives, and instead of trying to find constantly for new opportunities, but look at the opportunities they currently have and see how they can improve on them, whether it's creating systems, organizing it more, because I think a lot of us are very focused on finding a next opportunity, finding something else outside. But the best things that we have a lot of times are just close to us, in our neighborhoods, our streets, in our homes, something we're already working on. So hopefully people are doing that and trying to find ways to improve on those.
That's awesome. Cool. Love it. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, everybody that tuned in on the live stream, and we'll catch y'all next time.
Yeah. Thanks, Prady.
Thank you.